Welcome to another episode of PPL Pod. Okay, let's unpack a contradiction today that, honestly, it completely rewired how I think about the whole pop music machine.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm ready for this. What do you have?
So imagine a teenager in the mid-90s, right? She spends her free time idolizing the fiercely independent indie rocker, Ani DeFranco.
Okay, classic 90s aesthetic.
Exactly. And she absolutely hates the very concept of corporate music. She is basically the poster child for 90s anti-establishment grunge ideology.
Right, I know the type.
But, and here's the crazy part, this exact same person grows up to create one of the most polished, ubiquitous 10 million selling mainstream pop albums of the entire 21st century.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like the classic cliche of an artist just selling out, right?
Right.
Usually when you see that kind of trajectory, the industry machine has taken a raw talent, filed off all their interesting edges, and just, repackaged them for mass consumption. But the mechanics of what actually happened here are, they're entirely different.
That is exactly why we are taking a deep dive today into the life, the strategy, and the really recent, shocking career moves of Canadian singer-songwriter Nelly Furtado.
Yes, such an incredibly fascinating artist.
Because if you are listening to this, you definitely know the massive hits. Like you've heard I'm Like a Bird, you've danced to promiscuous, Say It.
Well,
Right.
yeah, you couldn't escape those songs if you tried.
Exactly. But knowing the hits is not the same as knowing the architecture of her career. We're talking about an artist who sold 35 million records, outright refused to be boxed into a single genre, and then made the stunning decision to walk away from live performing entirely in late 2025.
Only to immediately start dropping studio tracks again in 2026.
Right, which is just wild.
It really is. I mean, the standard playbook for a pop star is to find a lane, establish a brand, and just relentlessly optimize it year after year.
Yeah, just rinse and repeat.
Exactly. But her discography reads more like a series of hostile takeovers of different genres.
Which brings me to the big framing question I want to explore with you today. Because critics always call Furtado a musical chameleon, which kind of implies she just changed her colors to blend into whatever background the music industry provided.
Right, like she was just reacting to the environment.
Exactly. But looking at her moves, I'm wondering, did she constantly change her sound to adapt to the music industry? Or did she weaponize her adaptability to force the industry to bend to her?
Ah, that's a great question. And to figure out how she managed to maintain that kind of agency against a notoriously controlling industry, we really need to look at the psychological foundation she built, like long before anyone handed her a microphone.
Okay, take us back.
So, Nelly Kim Furtado was born in 1978 in Victoria, British Columbia.
And she was named after the Soviet gymnast Nelly Kim, right? I love that specific detail so much.
It's such a great detail. So her parents, Antonio and Maria, were working-class Portuguese immigrants. They arrived in Canada from San Miguel Island in the Azores in the late 60s, and the household was deeply, deeply rooted in Portuguese culture.
Like musically, you mean?
Oh, absolutely. She was singing in Portuguese by age 4. She was playing the trombone and ukulele by 9 and writing her own songs by 12.
Wow.
But the real mechanism that drove her future success wasn't just, early musical exposure. It was actually her mother's job.
Oh, right. She worked in hospitality, didn't she?
Yeah, her mother worked as a housekeeper in Victoria, and for 8 summers, Nelly, along with her siblings, worked right alongside her as a chambermaid, like physically scrubbing hotel rooms.
I mean, let's think about the practical application of that for a second. Scrubbing toilets and making beds for 8 consecutive summers gives you a very specific lens on the world.
It really grounds you.
It does. When you know how to grind through an 8-hour physical shift of invisible labor, a record executive trying to intimidate you in an air-conditioned boardroom probably doesn't hold much weight.
Exactly.
She walks into the high-stakes world of international pop music already inoculated against the industry's favorite weapon, which is fear.
That is so true. And that working class pragmatism shows up the second she graduates high school. Like, she doesn't wait to be discovered.
What does she do?
She moves to Toronto and takes a full-time day job at an alarm company just to fund her own creative development.
An alarm company. The contrast there is so funny to me.
I know. And while she's working there, she embeds herself in the Toronto underground scene and forms a trip-hop duo called Nelstar.
Okay, for those who might not remember the 90s underground, can you explain the mechanics of trip-hop? because it is miles away from the sunny pop she later became famous for.
Oh, it's a completely different universe. So trip-hop was an electronic subgenre built on heavy, slow breakbeat drums, really atmospheric synthesizers, and usually a very moody, detached vocal style.
Like Massive Attack or Portishead kind of vibes.
Exactly, yeah. It was insular, shadowy, and very specific to urban club subcultures at the time. It's basically music meant for a dimly lit basement at 2 a.m.
But this is where her independence flares up, right? Because she actually walks away from her own trip-hop duo.
She does.
She cites that the style felt too segregated and didn't allow her to showcase her full vocal range or personality. I find this move absolutely staggering.
How so?
Well, she has no record deal. She's working at an alarm company, yet she refuses to be pigeonholed. It reminds me of like a creative venture capitalist.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. She looked at her artistic equity and realized that putting all her capital into one highly niche, illiquid asset class like trip-hop was a bad long-term bet. She wanted a diversified portfolio.
That's a highly accurate way to view it, actually, because if you commit to a rigid underground aesthetic, you gain street credibility, sure, but you lose mobility.
Right. You get trapped.
Exactly. And she recognized that early on. She wanted the freedom to integrate R&B, Portuguese fado, acoustic folk, and mainstream pop. So she leaves the duo, strikes out on her own, and in 1997, she performs at the Honey Jam talent show in Toronto.
And that Honey Jam performance is the spark.
Yes, it changes everything.
She catches the eye of Gerald Eaton from the band The Philosopher Kings. He and Brian West help her record a demo, and that demo lands on the desk of an A&R executive at DreamWorks Records, which ultimately leads to her debut album in the year 2000. Whoa, Nelly.
And just for context, an A&R artist and repertoire executive is essentially a label's talent scout and project manager. They're the ultimate gatekeepers.
Right.
And getting a major label's backing in the year 2000 was a massive undertaking, especially with the music she was making.
Because of what was popular at the time.
Exactly. If you look at the charts in 2000, the industry had bifurcated. You had heavily manufactured, hyper-polished teen pop like Britney Spears and NSYNC on one side.
And then aggressive rap metal like Limp Bizkit on the other.
Right. And right down the middle comes Furtado with Whoa, Nelly.
It's this incredibly eclectic, world beat-influenced pop sound. It's sunny. It has acoustic guitars layered over hip-hop breakbeats.
It was so fresh.
It completely disrupts the binary of the 2000 music scene. It sells 6 million copies. And she wins a Grammy for Best Female Pop Vocal Performance for I'm Like a Bird.
Huge achievement.
She fundamentally proved that you didn't have to fit into the pre-existing molds to dominate the market.
But the industry response to a massive debut like that is universally the same. They demand a sequel. They want, whoa, Nelly, part 2, so they can just capitalize on the established brand?
Of course they do.
But Furtado does the exact opposite. In 2003, she pivots entirely and releases Folklore, which is an introspective, acoustic-heavy album deeply influenced by Portuguese fado.
And fado is known for that profound melancholy and really expressive vocal style, right?
Exactly. It's beautiful, but it's not exactly what DreamWorks was hoping for after I'm Like a Bird.
Commercially, it doesn't perform anywhere near the level of her debut. Now, the easy, surface-level narrative is that she suffered the classic sophomore slump.
Right, that's what everyone said.
But I want to dig into the actual corporate mechanics behind why Folklore stalled. Because it had very little to do with the music itself.
No, it really didn't. The stalling of Folklore is a textbook example of how corporate bureaucracy can basically crush art. Right as she was launching this album, her label, DreamWorks Records, was being bought out by Universal Music Group.
Oof, bad timing.
The worst. During the merger, Furtado was absorbed into a different label entirely, Geffen Records.
If you've ever survived a corporate buyout at your own 9 to 5, you know exactly what this looks like. Your old boss is gone, the new management has their own priorities, and your projects suddenly lose all their funding.
That is exactly the same principle that applies to the music industry. The A&R reps and marketing executives who originally championed Furtado at DreamWorks were either fired or they were entirely focused on saving their own jobs.
Wow, so no one was looking out for her record.
Nobody. Geffen inherited her contract, but they didn't have any institutional investment in her success. So the promotional budget for Folklore essentially evaporated. The album was basically orphaned by the corporate machine.
I am so glad we are clarifying that mechanism because I completely reject the idea that Folklore was a failure.
Oh, absolutely not.
I mean, while the American corporate label was fumbling the promotion, Furtado took the track Força from that album and performed it live in Lisbon as the official anthem for the UEFA Euro 2004 soccer tournament.
Which is a massive global stage.
Massive. She is singing on a global broadcast, honoring her heritage. To me, Folklore wasn't a slump. It was a strategic recalibration, like a cultural palate cleanser. She needed to step off the pop star conveyor belt, wash her hands of the DreamWorks aesthetic, and lay a new foundation.
And that strategic recalibration sets up a fascinating cause and effect for her next move.
How so?
Well, having just watched an introspective, quiet album get buried by label politics, she understood that if she wanted absolute leverage, she needed to create something so undeniably massive, so commercially bulletproof, that no corporate shuffling could ever sideline her again.
And that realization drives her straight into the studio with super producer Timbaland in 2006.
Yes.
Which kicks off the Supernova era, the album Loose. But this is where I struggle with whiplash, to be honest.
Yeah.
She goes from melancholy Portuguese fado straight to the center of the global club scene. How do they actually build this new sound?
So Furtado labeled the sound punk hop. Mechanically, what she and Timbaland did was take the heavy, syncopated, bouncing hip-hop beats Timbaland was famous for, and they aggressively layered them with distorted synthesizers inspired by 1980s new wave.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then, instead of singing with the airy, acoustic style of her previous work, Furtado adopted a much more visceral, rhythmic, almost spoken-word delivery.
Right.
It was dark, it was mysterious, and it was explicitly designed for midnight in a crowded club.
The cultural impact was staggering. The album sold over 10 million copies worldwide. Man-eater, promiscuous, say it right. These tracks absolutely choked the global airwaves.
They really did.
But here is the detail that shatters every preconceived notion I had about how pop music is made. Furtado attributed the raw, youthful, energetic vibe of this massive club record to the presence of her 2-year-old daughter in the recording booth with her.
I know, it sounds totally made up, but it's true. It entirely flips the conventional wisdom of the entertainment industry.
Because the persistent myth is that motherhood forces a pop star into a mature phase, right?
Exactly. Usually resulting in slow, adult, contemporary ballads. The assumption is that domestic life inherently dulls a performer's edge.
But practically speaking, how does bringing a toddler to the studio result in promiscuous?
Well, think about it. If you are managing a 2-year-old while trying to record, you just don't have the luxury of overthinking. You can't spend 6 hours agonizing over a single vocal take or trying to sound pretentiously cool. The environment becomes inherently playful, chaotic, and spontaneous.
Because you're constantly distracted.
Yes. It forces you to trust your gut instincts and operate with raw energy. That unpretentious, rapid-fire creativity is exactly what made Loose sound so effortlessly magnetic.
It's brilliant. She brings domestic reality into a high-end studio session and accidentally creates the club anthem of the decade.
It's amazing.
And the leverage she gained from selling 10 million albums gave her total control over her boundaries. Let's look at the Playboy offer from 2006.
Oh, this is such a good story.
Right, so at the height of the Loose era, she is being marketed globally as a mainstream sex symbol. Playboy magazine approaches her and offers her $500,000 for a photo shoot.
Which is a huge amount of money.
Huge. But the wild part is, they offered her $500,000 to pose fully clothed.
Fully clothed.
And she still turned it down.
The mechanics of that refusal are incredibly telling regarding her agency, though.
How so?
Well, on the album Loose, she was playing a character. She was directing her own sexuality, using provocative lyrics and high glamour aesthetics, but entirely on her own terms.
Right, she's the boss.
Exactly. But the moment you agree to pose for a legacy men's brand like Playboy, even fully clothed, you are handing the directorial control of your image over to Hugh Hefner's empire.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Yep.
You become a product in their catalog.
Yes. She recognized that the $500,000 was basically a trap to co-opt her brand, and she refused to cede that power.
So she has conquered the English language pop world. She has complete control of her image. She has outmaneuvered the label executives. The logical next step for a highly optimized pop star is to rinse and repeat.
But of course she doesn't.
No. Furtado, instead, decides to release Me Plan in 2009, which is an album recorded entirely in Spanish. She didn't even have perfect command of the language at the time. I think she estimated her fluency was around 50 to 60%.
Which is so brave, honestly.
It really is. Yet she dives in and wins the Latin Grammy for Best Female Pop Vocal Album, becoming the first Portuguese-Canadian to ever do so.
The genre hopping is just dizzying at this point.
It is.
We've gone from underground trip-hop to world beat acoustic to fado-influenced folk to synthesized punk hop to award-winning Latin pop. For years, critics just assumed she was restless or actively trying to confuse the market.
But a piece of information emerged much later that completely recontextualizes her entire creative process.
Right.
I want to fast forward to 2023. In an interview with Folk magazine, Furtado revealed that she had recently been diagnosed with ADHD.
Yeah.
When I read that, everything just clicked.
Yeah.
It felt like the mechanical engine driving her entire career suddenly made sense.
It really does. When we look at how ADHD affects a creative brain, it isn't just a quirk. It fundamentally alters the creative workflow. A neurodivergent brain often relies on the dopamine rush of novel stimulation.
So once the novelty wears off,
Exactly. You master a specific style or solve a creative puzzle, and the dopamine fades. Your brain literally, physically demands a completely new, unfamiliar challenge to stay engaged.
which explains why the music industry model was so fundamentally incompatible with her.
Yeah.
The major label business model relies entirely on economies of scale.
Very true.
They want you to build a mold, say the loose punk hop mold, and then they want to pour money into that exact same mold for the next decade because it's predictable and safe.
Right.
But for someone with ADHD, staying in that mold isn't just boring, it is creatively paralyzing.
Precisely. Her diagnosis retroactively explains why she felt that being segregated into one genre back in 1997 was so suffocating. The industry demands stagnation under the guise of brand consistency, but her neurology demanded constant evolution.
That neurological framework also brings a lot of clarity to how she managed the complexities of her personal life and business in the modern era. The timeline shows a life that refused to stay neatly categorized.
Yeah, she had a lot going on.
She took significant hiatuses. She had a daughter with Jasper Gilhunia, later married and separated from Damasio Castellan, who was actually the sound engineer she collaborated with on Loose.
Right.
And she eventually had 2 more children with the American rapper Jerry, also known as Haji Beats.
Through all those ebbs and flows, the one constant was her drive for autonomy. If the major label system couldn't accommodate her need to constantly shift gears, she just had to build a system that could.
So she goes independent.
Yeah. By 2017, she had established her own independent label, Nelstar Entertainment, and released her album, The Ride, entirely on her own terms. She essentially became her own executive.
Setting the stage for what we can basically call the victory lap of her career. In the 2020s, the culture collectively realizes how influential she has been.
She gets massive flowers.
Drake brings her on stage in Toronto in 2022 to perform her classics. In 2023, she drops a massive club track, Eat Your Man, with dance producer Dom Dolla.
Such a good track.
It is. She even reunites with Timbaland and Justin Timberlake for the song Keep Going Up, proving she can effortlessly tap right back into that 2006 magic. She releases her 7th studio album, simply titled 7, in 2024. She is playing major festivals across the UK and Europe.
She had successfully bridged the gap between legacy icon and active contemporary artist. And that is exactly when she initiates the most brilliant paradox of her entire career.
Right. In October 2025, right off the momentum of a massive summer festival run, Nelly Furtado announces on social media that she is retiring from live performances for the foreseeable future.
I remember the shockwaves that sent through her fan base. People assumed she was stepping away from music entirely.
But the truth was far more strategic. She walked away from the stage, but she didn't leave the studio.
No, she didn't.
In 2026, she continued dropping new music. She released Electric Circus with Boy Wonder and Canada Soccer, and a month later dropped Torture of the Heart with the electronic duo DV Beebs.
The mechanism of this retirement is really the ultimate flex of artistic control. Live touring is the most grueling, corporate, physically exhausting treadmill in the modern music economy.
Oh, without a doubt.
It requires massive logistics, rigid scheduling, and relentless repetition. By retiring from the stage but keeping the studio open, she surgically removed the corporate grind from her life while preserving the pure, spontaneous act of creating music. She basically hacked the system.
I want to bring this all the way back to the tension we started with. We talked about a working-class teenager scrubbing hotel rooms, a girl who idolized the fierce independence of Ani DeFranco and hated the idea of corporate music.
Right, the 90s grunge kid.
The beautiful irony of this story is that by retiring from the live touring machine in 2025, but retaining the power to drop studio tracks whenever her ADHD brain finds a new spark in 2026, she actually achieved the exact anti-corporate, purely creative freedom she dreamed of as a teenager.
It's incredible.
She just took a 45 million album-selling global superstar detour to get there.
She really proved you can utilize the machinery of the mainstream pop world without letting it consume you. She built an undeniable amount of leverage with albums like Loose, and then used that commercial leverage to literally buy her own freedom.
Yeah.
She learned the rules of their game, mastered it, and then walked off the board entirely when it no longer served her.
Which leaves us with a truly provocative thought to mull over. We live in a highly optimized era where pop stars are pressured to be predictable, focus-grouped lifestyle brands.
Definitely.
They map out their marketing eras 3 years in advance. But when you look at Nelly Furtado's shifting, unpredictable, hyperactive, and fiercely independent path, you have to wonder, is that chaotic refusal to be categorized actually the truest form of artistic success? To never be put in a box and to leave the stage exactly when you decide your shift is over. I'll leave you to think about that one. Thanks for listening to PLL Pod. Keep tuning in for more stories worth knowing.